Hare Krishna.
Jai Nitai.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 17, 17, 83, testing 1, testing 2, 45, 16,
108, 108.
108, 1008, 108, 108. Dandavats to all from Tapanandini. Good morning. Hello. Hello. Satyabhama Didi in Morelia. Buenos dias. Rajasundari Didi in Israel. Praneshwari Devi Dasi. Good morning. Over here it's good morning. Gangarasa Dasi is here with us. Satyabhama Didi from Morelia. Buenos dias. Tapanandini was here. She disappeared for a moment. Maybe she'll come back. Rajasundari, there's Vrindavan Chandra Prabhu. Praneshwari Devi Dasi is here with us. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let me know when you want me to begin.
So I want to welcome everybody. Here today we are starting the second part of our project, the middle part of the Bhagavad Gita. And with us today is Mahayogi Sripad Mahayogi Prabhu. He is a very well-known truth seeker who has been on this way for more than 45 years and spent a lot of time in India. And he was a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, of Sridhar Maharaj, of Govinda Maharaj. And he translated a lot, or not translated, excuse me. He is one of the authors of great 5 books written by Sridhar Maharaj. And he is editing a lot of other spiritual books, and he is a spiritual consultant of the project Fulldom Pro in Los Angeles and throughout the whole world. And so today he is with us, continuing to tell us about Bhagavad Gita. And so please accept our obeisances and the words.
Right, Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for inviting me. All right, so for those who are joining us for the first time,
Para los que se están uniendo a nosotros por primera vez,
for those of you who are joining us here
para los que
at
se unen a
Gita
nosotros
Talks for the first time,
a Gita Talks por
my
primera
name
vez,
is Mahayogi,
mi nombre
and
es
we're looking at
Mahayogi
this book here. This is called the Bhagavad
y
Gita.
estamos
All right.
leyendo este libro, el
The
Bhagavad
word
Gita.
Gita
La
is a
palabra Gita
Sanskrit word. It means
es una palabra en
song.
sánscrito que significa canción.
Bhagavan refers to
Y
God.
Bhagavan se refiere a
So
Dios.
Bhagavad Gita means the
Bhagavad
song
Gita
of
significa
God.
la canción de
And
Dios.
there's a very nice invocation
Y hay una
to the Gita that was
invocación al
written a
principio
long
del
time
Gita
ago by
que se escribió hace mucho tiempo
a great teacher named Shankara. And he
por un
says,
gran maestro,
Sarvo
Shankara.
Panishado Gavo Dogda Gopalanandanaha Parto Vatsa Shudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahat. He says that the
Dice
Bhagavad Gita is the essence of all the different
que el
Upanishads,
Bhagavad Gita es la esencia de todas las
and it's compared to a
escrituras
cow.
espirituales y se compara a
Dogda
una vaca.
Gopalanandana, Lord Krishna is famous
El
as
Señor Krishna
Gopal, a cowherd boy,
se llama
and he's
Gopal, que es un
milking this
vaquerito,
cow.
y él está
Arjuna
ordeñando
is
esta
just
vaca.
like a calf,
Arjuna
and learned
es como un
scholars and
becerrito,
pure devotees are
y
to
los
drink
devotos
the nectarine
van
milk
a
of
tomar
Bhagavad Gita.
ese néctar
Ekam
del
Shastram
Bhagavad Gita.
Devaki Putra Gitam, Eko Devo Devika Putra Eva, Eko Mantras Tasya Namani Jani, Karmani Ekam Tasya Devasya Seva. So let there be one Shastra, one book.
Que
Ekam
haya
Shastram
solamente
Devaki
una
Putra
shastra.
Gitam, that which was sung by the
Eso es lo que se
son of
cantó
Devaki Putra.
por el hijo de Devaki,
Let
por
there be
Shri
one
Krishna.
God, Eko Deva, Devaki Putra Eva, the son of Devaki.
el hijo
That
del
means
Eva.
Krishna.
Eso significa Krishna.
Let there be one scripture
Que haya solamente una
for the
escritura
entire world,
para todo el mundo.
the Bhagavad Gita. And Eko mantras, tasya namani jani. Let there be one mantra,
Y
which
que
is
haya
the Hare
solamente
Krishna
un
mantra.
mantra.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I will play the Hare Krishna mantra on the
Yo
harmonium
voy
and
a
you can follow
tocar
along.
el armonio para cantar el Hare Krishna Mahamantra.
Krishna Krishna Hare Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. So we're here to discuss the seventh
Estamos aquí
chapter of the
para
Bhagavad
discutir
Gita.
el capítulo 7 del Bhagavad Gita.
Originally in this project, the idea was we would
Originalmente en
have
este,
three
en
different
este proyecto,
speakers, and I would cover the first 6
yo
chapters.
iba a cubrir
And
los
then
primeros 6
Madhusudana
capítulos.
Maharaj,
Madhusudan Maharaj
our
iba a
friend,
continuar
would cover the next 6 chapters, and we would
de
finish
los
with Devashish
capítulos
Prabhu from London. All of
siguientes
them
y
very
finalizaba los 6 últimos
learned
capítulos de
in the
Bashish Prabhu de
scripture and
Londres,
expert in the Bhagavad Gita. But I
quienes
was
son
asked to
expertos en el
continue,
Bhagavad Gita.
so
Pero se decidió que yo iba a continuar
I consider that a
con
great
todos los
honor, and that's
capítulos.
very kind
Y
of
yo
all of
considero
you.
que eso es un gran honor y
The
estoy
first
muy
6
agradecido.
chapters of the Gita
Los
are
primeros
generally
6
considered to
capítulos
be
del Gita
preliminary. So
se consideran
at the
preliminares.
outset, I thought, well, I'll take on the preliminary part and I'll
Yo
leave
voy
the
a tomar la
higher
parte preliminar y la parte
aspects of the Bhagavad
más
Gita to the higher
elevada, el
devotees.
aspecto más elevado a los
this
devotos más elevados.
Project has been
Pero
forced upon me, more or less, and I'll do my best to continue the next 6 chapters. So we finished the last chapter with this famous verse, Yoginam api sarvesham madgatenantaratmana shradhavan bhajate yomam same yuktatamo mataha. Now Krishna says here that after a long discussion about yoga, Krishna says, well, really the best yogi, madgatenantaratmana, is one who absorbs his atma in me. And this is a very controversial sort of thing to say, because here Krishna is coming out as Bhagavan. He's really letting you know he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is a very tough nut to crack by those who would take an impersonal view of the Bhagavad Gita. Everyone loves the Bhagavad Gita because it's so full of wisdom, and everyone wants to claim it for themselves. So they try to make this interpretation about the word mam, which means me. It's interesting. I found that in Spanish, the word yo means the self. When people talk about the self, they say the yo. And I find that curious because that more or less corresponds to the impersonal interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita given by the followers of the Shankara school, who try to say that when Krishna says mam or yo or I or me, he's referring to the collective consciousness or the general me. In other words, I am, but when you are you're also thinking I am. So there's this collective I am, where we are all thinking I am. So that I, that yo, that mom, this is what Krishna is referring to when he says, absorb yourself in me. Now, you are also me. So you absorb yourself in your me, and I will absorb myself in my me. But this is really word jugglery, and it's rejected by the personalist school of Bhagavad Gita interpretation, of which I am a follower. From the time of Ramanujacharya and Madhvacharya, at least in the 10th and 11th century, the original Bhagavad Gita commentator was Sridhar Swami, who was before Shankara. And he seems to have taken a more literal view of the word mam. And the literal meaning is me. So when Bhagavan, or God, says me, he means Krishna, and Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's how we take that. This, of course, as I said, it's a little controversial because people don't like it that Krishna is God. They want God to be a sort of impersonal force. And as long as you apply that kind of interpretation to the Bhagavad Gita, then no one will really raise an objection. It's allowed to be considered a sort of universal truth. So a quick sketch of the Gita will skim over a lot of subtle points like that one. But the Bhagavad Gita is worthy of a very deep study. And I'm just trying to do my best to give a sort of condensed synthesis of the general ideas. Philosophy is often divided into different categories: epistemology, or how we know what we know; ontology, the study of being; metaphysics, or analysis of the physical and non-physical world; and ethics, or how to conduct ourselves in this world on the basis of a moral point of view. And the Gita takes in all of these, but the 18 chapters of the Gita can be divided into these 3 sections. And I'd like to just summarize a little bit what we've seen in the first 6 chapters. In the first 6 chapters, Krishna explains the ontology of being and different ideas about ethics. According to Vedic ethics, or Dharma, there's 4 pillars to proper living: honesty, compassion, purity, and austerity. Compassion is important. It means charity. Also, an interesting point is that while Arjuna is very much worried about the karmic reaction of war, Krishna points out that relative considerations about ethics really belong to the relativistic world, this world of exploitation, world of experience, and that a real spiritual program has to try to transcend these mundane considerations. So Krishna begins his discourse by reminding Arjuna about the temporary nature of the world and the eternal nature of the soul. He says death is inevitable and the soul is eternal. He asks Arjuna to go beyond his ordinary ideas about dharma and ethics and consider the transcendental life of the soul. So Arjuna is worried more about society consciousness, but Krishna begins to unravel the idea of God consciousness. These two can work in harmony, but many religious principles are really meant to serve society consciousness, and God consciousness and sacrifice will take us to a higher plane. So in the 3rd chapter, Krishna begins by talking about sacrifice. And again, normally you do a sacrifice to get something. the Bhagavad Gita is often considered to be a kind of Bible of Hinduism. But because people have an external reading, they think that the Gita really ratifies ideas about caste and the worship of various gods while upholding Brahmanism and a kind of Hindu status quo. But this is a very facile and superficial reading. In fact, Krishna encourages Arjuna to break with traditional views about Varnashram Dharma and come to a higher transcendental level of realization. For example, in the 4th chapter, he says, Chatur Varnam Maya Shrishtam Guna Karma Vibhagasha. So there's these 4 different main castes, Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras. But Krishna does not say Janma Karma Vibhagasha, they will be determined on the basis of birth, but he says Guna Karma Vibhagasha. The different social classes or castes, as they're known, should be determined on the basis of quality. And so he's really talking about a social division, that carpenters are carpenters and warriors are warriors, and they have a different kind of dharma and program. But he's not saying that if you're born into the Brahmana class, then all your descendants forever will be Brahmanas and have the right to lord it over everyone else. Krishna's really talking about the quality of one's qualification. And in a way that cuts against the status quo traditionalist idea about caste. So there's all these different readings of the Bhagavad Gita, and it's important to try to get a deeper reading. Society consciousness and God consciousness are always in clash. And we see this practically. Krishna encourages Arjuna to leave aside society consciousness, but this is going to cost him. If you think about Arjuna's reputation as a hero and his rivals, you'll find that Arjuna's rival Karna will always remain as the great tragic hero of the Mahabharata. He's the sort of Byronic hero of the epic. He challenges the gods, he challenges Krishna himself. And people who love poetry and great tragic epics always love Karna, where Arjuna is seen as some kind of a spineless pawn in the hands of this trickster, Krishna, who's always breaking the rules. And you'll see that in a lot of different mundane versions of the Bhagavad Gita, from the poetic version of Ramesh Chandra Dutt, a Bengali, who gave a sort of general translation, to the modern American scholar Wendy Doniger, who finds that all Hinduism is really Freudian and everything is based on sex. If the Mahabharata is a moral fable, then Krishna is a kind of questionable shapeshifter who sets traps for the star-crossed Karna. It's unfair what happens to Karna. Just as Odysseus in the Iliad and the Odyssey fools the noble Trojans with a wooden horse, Krishna employs all these different tricks to destroy the Kauravas. So he's seen as a trickster or an immoral person by those who have no real understanding of the central themes in the Mahabharata. They don't get that the Bhagavad Gita is really the core. And here, Bhagavad means Bhagavan, God, and spoken by God, Krishna. So these Western scholars like Wendy Doniger, who are determined to impugn Indian culture, are always trying to show that Mahabharata is based on Homer, the Bhagavad Gita is based on the Bible. These things came hundreds of years later. But a deeper reading, as we're trying to give, will show that the Mahabharata is far more subtle than both Judeo-Christian literature and mythology and Abrahamic religion. And this subtlety, the deep understanding about the Atma, about things like karma, dharma, samadhi, This is why yoga is embraced by millions all over the world who have found Western religion impoverished and Christian ethics hypocritical and riddled with racism, misogyny, and superstition. Those who would see Mahabharata as a comic book for instructing children in morality or as a flawed but tragic epic poem are blinded by their own picayune prejudices. Those who approach the Gita with prejudicial interpretations born of materialism, or socialism, feminism, or machismo, impersonalism, or the will to power and esoteric occultism will never uncover the true mysteries of the Gita, which are born of universal truth. You'll see even in the 20th century, there's a lot of thinkers like Julius Evola or René Guénon, who try to use the Gita as a textbook for developing mystic power through magic and yoga. But they will never discover the deeper mysteries of the Gita. So here in the 7th chapter, Krishna makes a very striking kind of affirmation where he describes the very ontology of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and explains that he, Krishna, is Godhead himself. And if this statement were coming from Jehovah, there would be no problem. Or if it were coming from the angel Gabriel in the Abrahamic religions like the Quran, people would have no problem accepting it. But because it's coming from Krishna and the Western world has a certain slant on India, many people are envious and refuse to even entertain the idea. But Krishna himself here in the 7th chapter will point that out. So the idea that Krishna might be understood as the Supreme Personality of God is hated by the envious. Part of that has to do with egoism. We don't like the idea that anyone else could be God besides ourselves. We want power and worship gods to get power, practice yoga to get power. But power is very superficial because death will come and take away all our power. So to sort of sum up the first 6 chapters again, Krishna takes us step by step through different levels of spiritual advancement. He teaches us that we're not simply stardust or atoms moving through the void, but Atma, spiritual essence. He teaches that we're not alone in the universe. There's higher powers. We should give something back to the universe and not simply take from it in order to be happy. And this is called jagya, or sacrifice. It's the basis of Vedic understanding. Just as the body is satisfied by giving something to the stomach, we can only be happy by giving something of ourselves to God. But this sort of sacrifice is a primitive form of religion. We give something, but accept something back. A good harvest, healthy life, victory over our enemies. I remember as a young man, I was told that the Psalms are the most beautiful part of the Bible, and I was advised to read them. But I was horrified when I found that the Psalms continually talk about defeating an imagined enemy. David is always talking about how he wants to kill his enemies and he wants God to help him. But I found this to be very miserable, very petty. I wanted something higher. And Krishna gives us this in the Bhagavad Gita. Offering one's work to God, he says, is higher than sacrifice. It's a higher level of giving, because you might do a sacrifice once a year, but your work is daily business. Then again, if karma yoga is not informed by a higher understanding of the self, it's still insubstantial or superficial. So for true realization, we should go deeper. And as Krishna moves through his argument from the 4th to the 6th chapter, he explains that when sacrifice is coupled with transcendental knowledge, it can lead to divine love, especially when informed by faith. So in the 5th chapter, when Arjuna asks about renunciation, Krishna again tells him, when work is done in sacrifice to God with faith in God, informed by transcendental knowledge about the relationship between soul and supersoul, it gradually becomes dedication, and that's the true purport of sannyas, or renunciation. Then Arjuna wants to know more about yoga. And yoga is a path towards self-understanding or self-realization, a concentrated method for developing a higher consciousness by disciplining mind and body, regulating the breath, following a strict practice through meditation and absorption in the Atma or Paramatma. But without true dedication to the Supreme, yoga itself is superficial. So here we find this verse, yoginam api sarvesham. The best yoga is one who dedicates himself to Krishna in bhakti. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur summarizes the first 6 chapters. He says, in the first 6 chapters, Jnana and Ashtanga Yoga, which lead to liberation, depend on Nishkama Karma Yoga, which first purifies the heart. So we come here to the 7th chapter of the Gita, and Krishna says, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, Maya Saktamana Parta Yogam Yunjan Marashraya, Asangashayam Samagram Mam, Jata Gyasyasi, touch Trinu. He says, listen, touch Trinu, try to hear. Like there's a verse in the Vedas, Shrinvanti Vishve Amritasya Putra. Listen, you sons of nectar, you were born for nectar, immortality. You're born to taste nectar. You should not be satisfied with anything less than eternal, immortal, divine nectar. So search for Sri Krishna. And this is affirmed here in the first verse of the 7th, where Krishna says, Maya Sakta Manaparta Yogam Yunjan Mad Ashraya, take shelter of me, Ma. Asangshayam Samagram Mam, Jatad Gasyasi touch Trinu. Know me. Supreme Personality of Godhead said, now hear, O son of Prita, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. So here he says, mat and mam a couple of times. And Krishna's talking about God and surrender to God and himself. And there's a nice Prabhupada comments in the purport, because you have this word Shrinu, touch Shrinu. Here, there's a nice section in the 2nd chapter of the 1st canto. Shrinvantam Svakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridyanto Stohya Badrani Vidonoti Suhrit Satam. It says to hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures, or to hear about him directly through the Bhagavad Gita itself is righteous activity. So just by hearing the sound vibration of the Bhagavad Gita or entering into its meaning, you become free from bad karma. Abhadrani, it's auspicious. And he says, one who hears about Krishna, who's dwelling in everyone's heart, and acts as best wishing friend and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him, becomes free from all karmic reaction. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and the devotees, he becomes fixed in devotional service of the Lord. By development of devotional service, one becomes free from the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus material lusts and avarice are diminished. When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly. Thus, Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection and enables one to come at once to the stage of a Sangshayam Samagra, understanding of the supreme absolute truth, personality of Godhead. So it's kind of interesting in here. It says, this one verse, it says, Evam prasanamanaso, Bhagavad Bhakti Yogata, Bhagavad Tattva Vijnanam, Mukta Sangasya Jayate. So Bhagavad also refers to the book Bhagavad, or the Bhagavad Purana, and it also refers to the person Bhagavad. So it says here by Bhagavad Bhakti Yogata, by serving the Bhagavad, by serving the true devotee, one becomes purified. Mukta Sangasya Jayate. One of the names for Krishna is Mukunda. And I asked Sridhar Maharaj once, what does this mean? And he said, well, you tell me. And I said, okay, well, Mukunda is the giver of liberation, isn't it? And he said, that's all right, but no. Then I said, well, what's your interpretation? And he said, Mukunda is Mukti Kukutsit Dadati, not Mukti Dadati, but Mukuda, Mukti Kukutsit Dadati. One who gives something that makes liberation look ugly, Kukutsit. In other words, the giver of divine love. So, Mukta Sangasya Jayate. By understanding completely Bhagavad Tattva Vijnanam, by practical and theoretical knowledge, one becomes absorbed in Bhagavad Bhakti. But here also, there's the person Bhagavad. So, this verse says, but then it's the next verse. Sorry, the second verse says, Jnanam teham savigyanam idam vaksyami asheshata yajgyat va neka bhuyonyat jnanat gyatavyam avashishate. Krishna says, now listen, Arjuna, I will declare to you now in full this knowledge, jnana and vijnana. So then, what's the difference between jnana and vijnana? Well, jnana is knowledge, but it has a theoretical side. Vijnana means practical knowledge. So just to know that God is great is not enough. If you concentrate your mind on the self through yoga, you'll make some development, but that may only be theoretical. Just as in school, if you want to pass the BA examination, you need both theoretical and practical exams. So Bhakti Yoga means to know God, but at the same time, practically employ yourself in the service of God. That's Vijnana. So Jnana means theoretical knowledge, but Vijnana means practical knowledge, which you will get through service to God and the Vaishnava. And then again, what are we talking about? What kind of knowledge is this? There's a nice shloka, Yasmin vigate sarvam idam vigatam bhavati. If you know him, you'll know everything. That's from the Upanishads. So try to know that thing by knowing which everything will be known. Try to know God. Search for Sri Krishna. Instead of Atato Brahma Jigyasa, Atato Krishna Jigyasa. Search out Krishna, the search for Sri Krishna. And this is the real goal of the kind of knowledge that's given by Krishna here in the Bhagavad Gita. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of samadhi. I was discussing this with my friend Pranashish the other day, and he's been practicing bhakti yoga for a long time. I don't know, 30, 35 years. And this is something that comes up a lot with devotees. They say, well, how do you know when the ego is dissolved? How do you know when there's samadhi? We ought to talk about that. And I told him, there's a few interesting things about the idea of samadhi. For example, in the 6th chapter of the Gita, which we've been discussing, it's a long talk about yoga. And it seems to culminate in the idea of samadhi. After all, the yoga process is an 8-fold path. There's asana, or the different yoga postures that are very popular. Then there's pranayam and pratyahara. Pranayam means proper adjustment of the air cycles in the body, and pratyahara has to do with giving up bad diet and negative practices. So asana, pranayam, pratyahara. Dharana and dhyan are different ideas about meditation and mindfulness, right? And then there's yama and niyama, which are the rules and regulations governing the life of a yogi. You can't really purify yourself if you're engaged in really negative practices like meat eating, promiscuous sex, addiction to gambling and things like that, and intoxication, right? How can you balance the mind and the body when you're under the influence of dangerous drugs? So the yogis give up all these things. And then finally, one supposes that by keeping mind, body, and spirit in balance and practicing all these different aspects of the 8-fold yoga path, one arrives at samadhi, which is a kind of absorption in the self. Of course, the self is insufficient. We need to also be absorbed in the supreme self. So how do you do that? And is it possible for an ordinary mortal? And I was telling Pranashish, I think that samadhi is not an impossible state to be achieved only by a few great saints. There may be different levels of samadhi, but samadhi means absorption in the self. And you probably know devotees who have been absorbed in their service so much that they forget about themselves. Maybe the people who are listening right now. Yeah. Maybe Pranashish himself, or Vrindavan Chandra or Braja Sundari, You're so absorbed in service to Guru and Krishna that you forget to eat, that you forget your bodily functions. You even forget your ego. So samadhi may be more like a kind of a flow state, or people in sports call it the zone, where maybe a football player has a broken leg or a broken foot, but he keeps playing. He doesn't feel the pain because he's completely absorbed in the game. Something like that. We are not, our school of yogis, we are not addicted to the idea of living in the forest alone, sitting on a grass mat covered by a deer skin and staring at the tip of our nose. Bhaktivedanta Swami showed us that you can be fully absorbed in yoga as you work as a carpenter. Perhaps you're making an altar for the deities. So you're busy sanding a piece of wood with sandpaper. And externally, it looks like you're just doing something very mundane. But internally, you're absorbed in the zone, in a kind of a flow state on a higher level. So Srila Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Pujala Ragapat Gaurabhabange, Matala Harichana Kirtana Range. And sometimes that's said differently, Matala Harijana Vishaya Range. In other words, we keep the higher internal understanding, but we're engaged in something like kirtan, or even something which might appear like vishaya, or some sort of mundane activity. And when one's entire self is absorbed like that, then there's no ego. And then we talked about the problem of the ego. Many devotees are interested in becoming ego-free. And we have this idea of ahankara, or false ego, meaning I'm involved in this world, I believe in my mind and senses, I'm pursuing happiness as a consequence of sensual activity because my ego tells me it's a good thing to do. And I get some temporary satisfaction from that. But really, I want to absorb my ego in bhakti and divine service. So we hear people trying to become free of their ego. But in a sense, I think some of that is influenced by asceticism or self-abnegation, as seen among the Buddhists, Buddhist mystics, even Christian mystics, or the Shankarites, for example. In India, you'll see extreme examples of austerity, where a man will hang from a tree with hooks in his chest, or sit under a tree and for so long that the tree grows around him and he's imprisoned by the tree and has a huge long beard. But we're not addicted to this kind of self-abnegation or destruction of the ego, precisely because we're involving our ego in dedication through acts of service, through acts of love. So the idea that I will fast, I will perform an extreme fast or extreme austerities, this is not really our line and can be dangerous. And so I've seen some devotees who, it's almost as if they're pouring acid on their ego to dissolve the ego. A form of self-denial where, I hate to say the word hate, but one almost hates oneself to the point of suicide. And it's interesting that in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, at some point, Sanatana Goswami is disgusted with himself and he thinks, I'm unfit, I'm so fallen, I'm so low, I'm so miserable, I'm such a petty human being, I'm such an egotist, that he entertains the idea of suicide. But Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu points out to him, well, if you kill yourself, you're killing a Brahmin. So in a sense, if you go out of your way to destroy your own ego, you're hurting yourself. And the devotees of Krishna are very special. Later on in the 7th chapter, I think it's in the 7th chapter, Krishna says that, I'm looking it up. he says that devotees are one in a million. This is many thousands among men. One is interested in transcendental knowledge, and of them, one might be a devotee. So devotees are very special people. Yeah, he says, after many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a soul is very rare. So the devotees are very rare, and they're very special people. So you shouldn't try to destroy yourself or destroy your ego by too much self-punishment. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Srila Govinda Maharaj used to say that, in a nutshell, he would say that my religion is kindness and tolerance. Trinadapi nichena tarorapi sahishnuna. Be kind to others, but there's nothing wrong in being kind to yourself. So, if you're thinking, I shouldn't go to the hospital because I'm sick, because I don't need to take care of myself. I shouldn't go to the dentist to take care of my teeth because the temple needs money. I want to make a sacrifice to the temple. That's okay. That's nice. But try to take care of yourself because we need you. We need Rajasundari, we need Pranashish, we need Vrindavan Chandra and Praneshwari Devi Dasi, and we need Tapanandini and all these great souls who've dedicated so much time and energy to trying to promote the message of the Bhagavad Gita and Krishna consciousness. Last night, I learned that Tapanandini had to go to the hospital, and I felt very bad for her. Now, normally, we're not supposed to pray to God and ask him for things because as we discussed, sacrifice is sort of a primitive form of religion. But there's nothing wrong with trying to support the devotees in the devotional community. In fact, you may get a certain satisfaction from that. When I was talking to Pranashish, I said, sometimes when you're deeply involved in some devotional act, you can feel satisfaction from that. You can feel a certain sort of ecstasy from that, from doing that. And you know when you feel it, and you know when you don't. So that's what we're going for. We're trying to absorb ourselves in service to the Vaishnavas. And even this little community that we have, it's very special. It's a small community, but that doesn't matter. You give me hope and you give me comfort, just knowing that I can sit here and talk about the Bhagavad Gita for a while and people are interested in hearing that. So if one of us is hurting and suffering, there's nothing wrong with reaching out and trying to help that person. So we can all pray for the health of Tapanandini and Brajasundari and her children and the other folks who are on here. And I wanted to take a moment to just say, I'm not getting any money for this. I don't collect on the basis of a Bhagavad Gita talk, because I remember what Gorkishore Das Babaji Maharaj once said about a professional Bhagavatam reader, that there was a really good Bhagavatam speaker in town. And they went to Gorkishore Das Babaji and invited him. And he said, no, thanks, I don't. And they told him, no, he's really good. He starts with the avatars, and by the time he gets up to the 10th canto, everybody is crying. They have tears in their eyes, hearing about the story of Krishna. I heard nectar. And Gorky Shordas Babaji Maharaj says, well, maybe you heard nectar, but what I hear is money, 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 money. So I'm not collecting any money for this. I don't want people sending me money, but I'd like to thank Pranashish and his friends. They saw me sitting in a very humble chair made of wood that I've been using for years and I really love. And he said, you know, that thing is killing your back. And I thought, really? He's right. I do have back pain. What do you mean? He said, we're going to send you a new chair from Ireland. How does that work? He said, well, you know, we'll put some money in your account and you can get it on Amazon, I think. So I went down to the local Office Depot and found this nice chair, you know, and I have to sit here and give class to students online. And I found after a couple of days in this chair, my back pain disappeared. So I wanted to thank him and everyone else who was involved. I don't know who they were, but whoever you are out there, if you're interested in helping other devotees, Tapanandini needs your help right now. Rajasundara needs your help, I think. I don't know. I don't want to presume to ask for somebody. But, so there you have it. That's a very brief introduction to the 7th chapter of the Gita. I thought it would be good to try to summarize a little bit the first 6 chapters, because the 7th chapter kind of represents a break. Krishna's not just talking in general. He's saying, look, Arjuna, you may be a mythical Superman, but I am the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So listen to me and you'll understand something about transcendental knowledge. And from there on, the mood of the Gita shifts a little bit more towards a deeper understanding of bhakti, which is why I originally had planned on Madhusudana Maharaj explaining this. So we talked about the first 6 chapters and the first 3 verses of the 7th chapter. So thank you very much for tuning in. Does anyone have any questions? Can you hear me? I don't know. Maybe I'm just talking
Maharaj,
to the wind. Oh, it's
yes.
Dandi Maharaj, Haribol Maharaj.
Maharaj, excuse me. Yes, I'm late because yes, I have some conversation. Excuse me, Maharaj. Yeah, but I missed something. And it's very valuable.
Well, we have a plan to transcribe these talks and then take a look. I usually make some notes. I don't always read them, but this time I read a little bit from my notes, you could probably tell. But we have a plan to gather this together and publish a little book or a pamphlet or something. And you can always watch the rerun on the YouTube. How's everything? Are you in Kyiv now? Petersburg, Moscow?
I'm in Kiev for long, Maharaj. Not in Kiev, maybe in Ukraine. I am here for long.
Okay.
Dandavat Parnashish Prabhu, Vrajasundari, Dandavat Parneshwari Didi, Dandavat.
Hare Krishna.
Dandavat. All Vaishnavas.
That's to everyone. Well, somewhere in Ukraine. Okay. I know you're working hard, Maharaj. Anyways, it's always good to see you.
Yes.
Looks like it's nighttime. Is it cold there?
Not yet. It was cold before. Because of time. I forget how it's called in English.
Oh yeah.
Yes, winter cold. Yeah, I forgot the exact name.
Сегодня идет снег.
Крещение, Christian
Ah.
holiday, and
It's a
usually it's
Christian
very cold.
holiday. Oh, really?
It was Christian holiday festival, and usually it's a very cold time.
All right. Well, it's good to see you,
Hello.
Maharaj.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. It's Tapanandini. Good morning.
Maharaj.
How are you this morning? You
I
feeling
know
better?
what, I am not ready to show in public my enigmatic smile that came from the facial paralysis I have now, but I've been present all the class. And as always, you are the best, Mahayogi. I tell you,
Hey.
always, you are the best.
Dandavat,
Well,
get
take
well
care of
soon,
you.
Didi. Take
Dandavat.
care. Love
Take
from
care of
Ireland.
yourself. Yeah.
I will keep watching all of you from the Facebook every day. Then,
Oh, Maharaj. Dandavat.
all my
Oh,
love.
Maharaj, it's called Epiphany Frost, Maharaj. Epiphany Frost.
Frost. Ah,
Yes, Epiphany Frost. It's called.
different frost. I think maybe you have many words for cold weather.
Yeah.
Well, there is a different. Can I say something?
Yes, yes.
There is a difference about the perception we have and what is going on around us, isn't it? So epiphany means how you perceive something, I think. I
Yes,
like words.
there was a famous linguist named Worf, and he found that the Eskimos, the Eskimales, they have something like 79 different words for snow. And he thought that language determines world view. It's an interesting theory, that because you have many, many words for snow, that means your culture will be snow oriented or something like that. That's called Worfianism. It's kind of an interesting point of view. All right, well, everybody's completely satisfied. I've spoke so much, I bored everyone to death, and we're done. We did 3 verses of 7th chapter, and we're good for today, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
yes.
it was perfect, Mahayogi. Haribol.
Hare Krishna, Mahayogi Prabhu, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, okay. So I want to tell you thank you very much for the beginning of the 7th chapter and for everything, and thank you that you're thinking about us and about our health. My obeisances to you. Thank you, Mahayogi Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Well, we wish you the best, Vrajasundari, and we hope that the stars will rain mercy on you.
Thank you.
Yes, best wishes.
Yes, Tapanandini, I also wish you health.
Thank you, thank you.
Yes, get well soon. Get well soon.
Sometimes the kind words of the Vaishnavas do us good and reanimate our souls so that we can go on. Sometimes living in the material world is not easy. So it's nice to know that Dandi Maharaj is out there.
Yes, Dandi Maharaj ki jai.
Yeah.
And you, Mahayogi ki jai. I'm
Hare
Pranashi,
Krishna.
I'm Pranashi, I'm Braya, and Tungarasa, Vrindavan, Praneshwari, and Lakshmi Priya. Mara, I don't know who she is, but very glad to see you here, Satya Bhauma.
Yeah, my goal is to travel to Ireland sometime this year. but right now I have no passport. I'm waiting, you know, it's one of those processes with papers. And then with the situation and the quarantine and all that, I don't know when it will be possible, but that's one of my big goals this year. So we'll see what happens. And we're trying to create, from the talks that I've given and from my notes, we're trying to create a little pamphlet or a book or something sponsored by SOS Press and Pranashish and his army of editors and, and translators. We'll see what happens with that. And so next week we'll continue with the 7th chapter of the Gita. And if you permit me, I will say adios and Hare Krishna and
Hasta pronto,
farewell.
Mahayogi.
Gaura Bhaktivinoda
thank
ki
you.
jai. And
Jai
Pranashish
Mahayogi
and
Prabhu ki
Gandhi,
jai.
everyone ki jai, all Western devotees and Eastern devotees ki jai.
Jai.
All right,
Jai.
Joy ho.
Haribol.
Jai Sripad Mahayogi
Haribol.
Prabhu
Ki
ki
jai.
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 Jai, jai. Thank you. Thank you very much. So see you next week. Please accept our
Jai.
obeisances.
Vada Sundara
Jai.
Didi ki jai. Jai. Gita Talks ki jai.
Dandy
Dandavad.
Maharaj
Dandavad.
ki jai.
Dandavad.
Hare Krishna.
Hasta pronto.
Садьябам. Садьябамам поклон. Дандават. Надя Прия. Саумья. Мой поклон. Дандават. Лилавати. Дандават. Пранешна детей. Дандават. Дандават. Жай. О, Надя Прия показалась.
Дандавата. Простите за косой перевод. Не получилось сегодня договориться с переводчиком. Я как могла, так переводила. Вот. Примите, пожалуйста,
Всё.
поклоны.
Думаю, все отлично. Я тоже поздно увидел. Я, к сожалению, не смог сразу включиться. Тут неожиданные были мне обстоятельства.
Но
Дандават.
все равно вы смогли. Это уже большая милость для нас, для всех.
Это
Да.
большая возможность для меня пообщаться с преданными. Редкая удача в нашей жизни.
Харе Кришна.
Тунгараса.
Кришна Джай.
Лакшми Прия, Мадавилатому поклон. Дандават всем. Дандават. Будем жить и служить.
Да, да, Махарадж. Харе Кришна. Я заканчиваю, завершаю конференцию. Дандават.
Дандават.